soon as the valley was gone. We feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up to the stars and bring the breakfast up to bed.
Welcome to episode 27 of the God's Own Scale podcast, your one-stop shop for chat on the little things in life. I'm back after an extended Christmas break, and today I'm chatting to the wonderful Aaron Jenkins from Project Wargaming. Aaron runs his own YouTube channel, Project Wargaming, and has appeared on Little Wars TV recently for their excellent Berlin Battle Report, which I highly recommend you go and check out immediately having listened to this podcast. I hope 2021 finds you all well and eager to push on with your own hobby projects. I must admit I've stalled a little bit on my Antietam project with just a tiny bit more of it to go. I think round about 8 bases, a couple of generals and a couple of headquarters bases. My painting mojo went AWOL, as sometimes happens to us all. If there's one thing I've learnt over the years, it's never to force the issue, so I have gone back to my other love, and that's the various ranges from Mantic Games, including some elves, enforcers for the Dead Zone game, and some figures for their excellent Hellboy and Walking Dead games as well. Been great fun getting those out. I hope you'll forgive me for these transgressions away from God's Own Scale. It feels a little bit like a confession, but in my defence, it's been a great palette cleanser for me to paint larger figures and to try out some different techniques. And I'm sure I'll be back painting the 6mm American Civil War, the figures for the Somme game, hopefully for the Juro 6, and my War of Independence and Zulu figures. I'm fairly sure Lockdown 3 has been a cause, in part, for this loss of mojo, with no imminent prospect of the gaming club reopening and no shows to look forward to. I've just not had quite the same motivation to complete projects, and so find myself dabbling around in my unpainted pile, which is no bad thing, as some of these figures have been in the to-do pile for some considerable time, and I'm talking, in some cases, years actually. Another result of the lockdown has made me think once again about selling off some of my lesser used figure collections that are collecting dust and taking up space. I constantly vacillate between thoughts of just getting rid of it all to I'd like to play that game one day, maybe in the future, at which point I'd regret selling it. But to be honest, my hobby life has been a constant series of purchases, painting, playing, and then selling off when the enthusiasm wanes, before buying it all again and once again starting the cycle back at the beginning. And at my age, I'm not sure that is ever going to change, so it's just the way of things, and I think sometimes you just have to accept it. Whichever way I go, I'll let you know. I'm not rushing into anything just yet, but the seeds of the idea are certainly starting to take hold. I'm really hopeful that the Juro 6 will be the first show I get to this year. As I talk now, it's the 17th of February, so we're talking 4.5 months away. I have a horrible feeling it will be just that bit too soon in the calendar. I don't know, but let's keep our fingers crossed. I really hope it does go ahead. But obviously it can only go ahead if it is safe to do so, and I'm sure, like me, well, we all trust Peter in his judgment as to where we go. Salute has made the sensible decision to move to November, and how that pans out as a stopgap for 2021 remains to be seen. Will it become their new spot within the calendar, or will we have another Salute, 5 months following the November one in its traditional April slot? That'll be an interesting development within the hobby that I'm sure we'll all keep our eyes out across the various social medias and the magazines to see what happens there. If it is in November and it doesn't clash with any other plans, I intend to go, hopefully as a bit of a roving reporter for God's Own Scale podcast. But let's see how things go. We're not quite out of this epidemic yet, or pandemic, sorry. Vaccination scheme seems to be going really well, but November's a while off yet, isn't it? So a lot of things can change. For those of you looking at expanding your 6mm lead piles, Bacchus have announced that they should be back open for business by the end of the month, by the end of February. And interestingly, they're capping orders at £50 for the time being, in the hope that the typical feeding frenzy that we've seen during previous reopenings is mitigated somewhat. If it is that by limiting orders to £50 per customer and they can remain open for longer or even not have to shut down again, that can only be a good move, which I applaud. Only time will tell, but I'll give my best wishes as ever to Peter and all the team at Bacchus who do such sterling work getting these orders out to us. And hopefully this light at the end of the tunnel is getting that little bit brighter as we move through 2021. Finally, before moving on to the interview, the competition that was set during the Christmas episode hasn't had an awful lot of entries. In fact, I think I can count them on one hand, which isn't quite what I was hoping for, to be honest. So I'm going to make a plea to everybody that listens to this podcast. Go back to the Christmas episode with Per, Alex and Dan. Have a listen to it. And I'm going to change the goalposts. I do apologise for anybody who has already entered and met the original criteria, but I think just to get the word out and make it a little bit easier, I think I probably set it a little bit too hard, makes it a little bit easier. I'm just going to ask now for 3. That's 3 of the 9 cultural references made by my guests, and by cultural references I'm talking about film titles, books, plays, etc. So get those into me via email at godzonescale@gmail.com or else on Twitter at godzonescale. I'm going to extend the deadline, and this will be the only extension to the deadline until the 14th of March, which is a Sunday, and the episode that follows that will be the episode where the draw is made, and 2 lucky winners will be announced. If you didn't listen to that episode and don't know what I'm talking about, this is a chance to win a gaming mat from Tiny Wargaming, who kindly have donated a gaming mat, a 6x4 gaming mat, in fact, of your choice, from their cloth gaming mats from their range, and also a £25 voucher with Bacchus. So a great opportunity for you to stack up, or stock up even, on some 6mm goodness. And with the some of the releases that Peter has been teasing us with, although we haven't been able to get our hands on them, then I'm sure there'll be plenty of people with plenty of ideas of how to spend £25. Okay, no outro this episode, so I'll thank you now for listening and for your continued support. I really do appreciate it. This is a great community that we're involved in, and there's lots more to come with the podcast. I've at least 7 or 8 more guests all waiting in line for their opportunity to have a word with me and get their thoughts on this wonderful hobby of ours out there. And I'll be working through those as soon as possible, probably settling into a schedule in a slightly more relaxed way than I did the second half of 2020. So round about a 3-week turnaround, I'm thinking, probably, whereas I really got out an episode every 10 to 14 days throughout that 6-month period, just with work and homeschooling and life and blah, blah, blah. I think 3 weeks is a probably more realistic time scale, and just keeps things fresh for the podcast. That will invariably change as we move through the year, as guests become available and fit in with my own schedule. So, but that's what I'm aiming for. 1 episode every 3 weeks. So I hope that's sufficient for you. If you do enjoy the podcast and would like to contribute to keeping the lights on in the Godzone Scale studios here at Godzone Scale Towers, I do run a Patreon campaign where you can support me in these endeavours. You can find that at patreon.com/God's Own Scale. There will be a link in the show notes. If you've got any feedback or wish to discuss anything that you hear during the podcast, or wish to complain or get upset by anything that's said, and that has happened in the past, you can contact me via email at godzonescale@gmail.com, or again at Twitter at godzonescale. So that's enough of me wittering on. You're not here to listen to my voice, you're here to listen to the interview with Mr. Jenkins. So sit back, warm your feet by the fire, and rest easy. It's time to talk about Six.
Mademoiselle from Armand, save to you. Sing it with all your heart and soul, and see everyone right up the pole. Mademoiselle from Armand.
Very good. Okay, welcome to episode 27 of Godzone Scale. Yes, we're back on the air after a short break following the Christmas festivities. And I'm very glad to say I have Mr. Aaron from, I don't know your surname, Aaron.
Jenkins. It's a British, it's Welsh, I guess. So. Yes,
you haven't got a Welsh accent though.
No. Very much.
No. But you'll know him better as the host and producer of the Project Wargaming YouTube channel. Welcome, Aaron, to the podcast.
Thanks. Great to be here. Finally get to talk.
Finally get to talk. This has been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yes, life gets in the way. It's amazing.
Yeah. Generally, from my end, I do apologise for that. We were due to record yesterday, and just circumstances got in the way somewhat. But we're here now. That's the important thing. How are you, Aaron? How are you?
I'm good. I just had my first vacation in quite some time, so it was great. It was good to be away. Spent time in a cabin that me and my folks own and built, and it's all heated by wood stove, and it's been sub-freezing in Indiana for the last week, so there's something comforting about being in crappy weather, but yet you're in a nice crackly fire cabin. So, yeah.
You're going to get very, very little sympathy from the UK listeners, Aaron, because holidays for us are out of the window at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well,
this is lockdown 3.0 that we're in at the moment, but hopefully just about to come out of it.
Yeah. You guys had some snow over there too, haven't you?
Well, yeah, we have actually. Post-Christmas, there's been a couple of belts of it that have come through, and the temperatures are still sub-zero at the moment. In fact, Scotland, the UK recorded the lowest temperature for 25 years, and that was up in Scotland at, I think it was minus 23 degrees, which is pretty chilly for the UK.
Well, you have that going for you, I guess. So.
Well, be grateful for small mercies. Aaron, as I said in the introduction there, I became aware of your work through the Project Wargaming YouTube channel, which hopefully we'll dive into shortly. But as I do with most guests that come onto the show, I like to sort of get under the hood and see what makes Aaron tick and what got you into this strange hobby of ours that's called wargaming.
Sure. Yeah, I think I have a little bit more of a unique story because I grew up in central Indiana. I grew up in a county of Indiana that's mostly farming. So the whole county had when I was growing up, it had maybe 17,000 people. And the town I lived in was 6,000 people. I was the only person, as far as I'm aware of, that wargamed in that county. And of course, back then, 30 years ago, like you didn't have the internet, you didn't have anything to connect yourself to other people, and so I kind of I didn't game by myself. I never did solo gaming. I always dragged my friends into it, and I tried to drag my dad into it. But yeah, I kind of didn't really know that there was this whole gaming world out there that I was unaware of. So I always kind of laugh when people say that gaming might be dying. It's just like I've never I've never been surrounded by so many gamers in my life now. So it's great. It's great to kind of be experiencing that. Um, so like I said, I grew up in rural Indiana. You'll hear that in my voice. And I think started off with just army men playing in a sandbox and firecrackers blowing them up and things like that. So I always
The
loved
good stuff.
the good stuff. And I loved the sandbox because I loved making terrain, which of course I think plays out in the rest of my life, right? In gaming. But then I started to get a little bit more serious because my dad wanted me to get out of his hair, I think, and so he introduced me to Axis and Allies, which I'm not for sure if you're familiar with that Avalon Hill game.
Yeah,
But
definitely, yeah.
but that was kind of my first introduction to wargaming. I had played some Dungeons and Dragons with friends when I was growing up too, but Axis and Allies did that. And then I remember going to Indianapolis because that was the big town we always went to get anything. You had to drive an hour to go watch a movie if you wanted to. And there was a store up there called the Game Preserve, which anybody in central Indiana will be familiar with. And that was, I went in there for the first time and I realized that there were these other army men on the shelves, and I remember I remember this distinctly. I remember asking the guys like, "Well, what are those for?" And he's like, "Well, they play games with them." And I was like, "Really?" And
Wow.
I was like, "Well, what kind of games? Like, what are the rules you use?" And so he pulled me over to another shelf, and there was Command Decision Second Edition box, and he pulled it off, and he was like, "This." And so that's kind of my start in legitimate wargaming, I guess. So 1/72nd scale, soft plastic miniatures, Command Decisions, and then I very quickly started. We would pull the car out of the garage, and when friends came over, and I would throw down a sheet of cloth on the ground, and then I had made these hills out of plastic or styrofoam sheets for hills and all that sort of stuff. And so I just remember kind of trying to play those games and muddy my way through because I was like maybe 12. So you can imagine a 12-year-old who's never played war games in their lives trying to muddy their way through Command Decision Second Edition and and figure out what is this about? Like, so I'm sure I didn't ever actually play Command Decision Second Edition, but we played something. But yeah, so I've started doing that. I kind of quickly switched over to 15 millimeter, and even some GHQ stuff. I saw that because there were some other hobby stops in Indianapolis, and did a little bit of that in high school, and then I got to college, and again I went to a very small college, and there was only like one other guy there, Mark Boyer, who I played games with every once in a while, and we had moved on to Battlefront, I think is the name rule set. So it's always World War II stuff. And then I again went to, I think, the Game Preserve, but this time it was on the north side of Indianapolis, and I asked if there was any groups that played war games, and they said yes, there was a club in Indianapolis, and the club was 19 and 1, which I'm still part of, I guessed, because the club's kind of split apart and is scattered to the four winds right now. But so I started showing up to their games every once in a while. and playing with them. And I was usually the youngest guy in there by like 10 years. And we played brother versus brother and all kinds of different things. I would just show up and play. So that was pretty sporadic. But then I think what really got me serious into gaming was I moved out to DC after college, Washington, DC. And I was all by myself. I moved out there because a girlfriend lived out there, and I taught art, elementary art. And I didn't really have any friends, and I found a game shop out there called Little Wars, and just started hanging out at that and got to know Farron and Elena Betchley, who were the owners, and they were just kind of like my parents away from parents in many ways. Just provided me just a nice place to go. Yeah. And that's the first time I was introduced to GW. So, I mean, again, kind of a strange thing. I was like 25 years old, had 10 years of gaming experience before I even knew that there was such a thing as Games Workshop.
I think that might be a unique.
I know. It's so weird, isn't it? So the only reason that I really played Games Workshop at that time was because that's what the guys were playing. And if I wanted to play games, then that's what I did. There was a group of guys who played DBA out there. And so I played with them some. But yeah, so I lived out there for a couple of years and was very active in that group. And then I came back to Indiana and actually went to seminary, which for us Catholics, seminary is kind of like a boarding school. And so, we went to boarding school basically in southern Indiana, which was even more rural than what I grew up with. So it was at a Benedictine monastery. So, to go stir crazy, you just start playing games. And so I had all my stuff and I would just put on games on Saturday and other guys would join us and it was fun. So that's kind of how I did that. And then once I got out of seminary and, started working, then my dad retired and he actually got interested in games. I was working on a project for Warlords Bold Action, and he just got interested. I don't know what it was. Something about that interested him, and he's like, "Hey, I'd like to try that." So that was about 5 years ago, and we've been playing almost once a week now, just me and him. Since then, and since then, I've gotten some other friends too. There's a group here in town that games, and then there's some friends of mine that we get together like once every month or so. And then the Club 19 and 1 I reconnected with when I got back to Indianapolis, and there's a group of us that get together from that club. But I think the biggest thing that I've done with 19 and 1 has been putting on the games at Gen Con, which is the biggest gaming convention in the world, and it just happens to be in Indianapolis. And so it's a very strange thing to put on games in the middle of Lucas Oil Stadium, but it's fun to do. So a lot of my gaming background is really putting on games for people who don't know how to play games or have never played games in their life, and so that I think has informed my gaming experience immensely. And so I love the visual side of it. I really got into terrain making when I was in DC, and then only at Gen Con, like I really started to experience that, like, hey, my tables look pretty good, and started diving into that a little bit more and getting a little bit more notoriety about it, I guess, and just kind of kept going. I guess my first claim of fame was not really a miniature game. It was the 3D. I took the Fantasy Flight board game for Games of Thrones or Game of Thrones and turned it into a 3D board game, which I had seen at a convention called Cold Wars out here. They had done a similar thing to Kingmaker, I think. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But 10 years later, Fantasy Flight came out with Game of Thrones board game, and I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool to do. So that happened, and then I just happened to have some friends that were connected to the big online site called Polygon. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, I don't think I have actually.
It's all mostly digital war game stuff, games that way. I'm still very ignorant of all of that, but I guess it just has a huge viewership because I had family members who saw the article on me and that contacted me, and I had never told them that I was into wargaming or anything, so they just saw it in Polygon. So that kind of got spread around, and then I just started having more ideas, and then Little Wars TV came along and kind of started giving me some more inspiration, I think, on different things to do, and it's just kind of continued to grow kind of from there. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear about my gaming background, but
no, that's fascinating, and it really is fascinating because one of my bucket list entries is to go to Gen Con. So as soon as you said that you're from Indianapolis, I'm thinking, oh my goodness.
I have an amazing amount of people who want to be my friends.
Have you got room for one more?
I do actually. That is the nice thing about my job is I live in big houses that typically have extra rooms. So, but actually our club puts on so many games at Gen Con that we get hotel rooms for free, in quotations, because you're working your butt off all day long. And you're putting on games. So it is definitely something to behold. So some of the Little War TV guys are talking about coming out, and I actually have a friend up in Canada who Gen Con is much more of an RPG role-playing game sort of thing, board game sort of thing. And he's really into role-playing, and so he actually comes down and has stayed with me, and I pick him at the airport and do all that stuff. So I'd be happy to do that for you.
Well, I mean that is fantastic, but Gen Con has always been on my radar, as has Adepticon is another one I've always wanted.
Yep, been to that one.
To get out. You've been to Adepticon? Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, so jealous. Yeah. So jealous.
Yeah, Gen Con, I would, if you're going to do one, I would do Gen Con. No offense to the Adepticon guys, but Adepticon is much more kind of GW, Mantic, kind of fantasy sci-fi based sort of stuff, and the historical side is there. Like the biggest thing at Adepticon is the saga historical stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned a few times on the cast before, actually, that my hobby life is sort of split in two between the 6mm historical side of things, and then I'm a huge fan of the Mantic Games product lines and the games that they produce. And I know one or two guys at Mantic, and they go over to Gen Con every year. Obviously, global pandemics allowing, but yeah, it's on my list. It's on my list. If I get over there, Aaron, we're going to have to hook up and share a coffee and share some stories. Definitely.
For sure.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, that I first became aware of your work through your YouTube channel and a build that you did on there, or catalogued on there, for a D-Day game. Did you take that to Gen Con?
Yes. Actually, I built it really for Gen Con.
Okay. So just tell us a bit about that, because that was an epic build, wasn't it? It was a huge undertaking for one person to do the entirety of that build. It just blew my mind.
Well, like I said, I think the Game of Thrones board game kind of prepared the way for a lot of that. And so I started to learn a lot of the techniques and kind of the process that you have to kind of go through to do that. I'm not married. I don't have kids. So when I come home to unwind, instead of watching TV, I just spend 2 hours doing hobby stuff. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
To be able to have that time and do that. Obviously, it takes a bit of commitment to do it, but and a vision.
I think you're underselling it there. A bit of commitment.
Well, yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had started the YouTube channel probably 6 months before that. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check. But I was doing ACW stuff. I was trying to get back into ACW because my dad and I were talking on a vacation that we had a couple years ago, and he was like, "Well, I like bold action, but I'm open to doing other stuff." And I said, and he's always been a huge Civil War buff like me, and I was like, "Well, we need to do Civil War. Like that's what we need to do." And so, in some ways, I started the YouTube channel more like a hobby vlog, I guess, and also to kind of keep myself motivated and on task. So committing to doing an upload like once a week is really good. I used to have a blog, and I have dyslexia, and so writing things is just terrible for me, just awful. And so I still sound like an idiot when I talk out loud, but it's way faster, and I don't have to, it's I can show better than I can write. So so I just kind of started to do that, and then the D-Day game came to mind, and I was like, this would be kind of fun to video and to show a step by step. And I'd been watching a lot of other YouTube channels that helped me with some of those processes. Gaming Geek, I think is his name now. He's in the UK. And then, but the biggest channel that probably helped me was actually a railroad channel called Luke Townsend, and he's out of Australia, I think, or New Zealand. That's terrible. They would kill me for not knowing which one, but I think he's Australian.
Keep it quiet. We'll keep it between me and you, Aaron.
That's right. That's right. I don't want to start a war.
No.
But I think he's out of Australia, and he does just some amazing stuff, and his tutorials are awesome. So those two channels, and then Mel the train tutor too, who I did meet at Adepticon a couple of years ago when we actually had stuff.
He's from Stoke.
Oh, is he?
Yes. Yeah,
which Stoke? Your Stoke or the other Stokes?
Yeah, my Stoke. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Closest to your Stoke I got was Nottingham, but so yeah, all of those kind of put together, and I wanted to do a D-Day board. I knew that I was going to go and visit D-Day, and so that was another motivation to visit the beaches and stuff. So it was a great way for me just to kind of immerse myself into that history, and just kind of take a bird's eye view of that. And at the same time, Little Wars TV was going on, and they were pushing Fistful of Toes, or had put that rule set out, and I had played it and really liked it, and thought that it would be great for kind of this big massive thing. The other thing is, when you play at Gen Con, you want to have as many players as possible, because then that gives your player hours up, which then gives you the free hotel room. And so so there's a method to why I have an 8-player game, is that we've just kind of found that that's kind of the sweet spot. And then we set up the games to be played so that it's like a 2-player game, but it's an 8-player game. So you're playing really the guy across from you. But there's 8 players doing that. And you'll have a little bit of overlap, but not a lot. So so I knew that that's kind of how I wanted to go, in the direction I wanted to go with the D-Day board game. And so at that time I wasn't into 3D printing, and so I kind of hand modeled the bunkers and basically everything. I actually did buy some 3D printed hedgehogs for that. And then now looking back, I'm like, that's so stupid. Like, that's so easy to make. Why did I not why did I buy those? But you know how it goes.
It's a journey, isn't it, hobby?
Yeah, it's So yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do. I really loved pouring the water because in college, I became an art teacher, but my background as an art teacher was I was a glass blower, and so I loved the optics of that, and so just anything that's shiny and blue and it looks glassy is always fun, um, and really happy with how the sea kind of turned out. In that, it really looked like it was a nasty day on the sea, um, and yeah, it seems like just kind of a fun game to play. People seem to enjoy it. The Germans love the first like 2 or 3 turns, and then the Americans start to like it as it goes on. So
they like it better the longer it goes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm looking at your channel now, actually, Aaron, and the header of the main picture is a close up of the hedgehogs and the sea effect. I mean, it's just incredible. It looks like you could take a dip in that water. It's that realistic. It's just incredible. And I can remember when I first saw it on the channel as you got to that point where you were going to start to do the water, and just being blown away by the artistry of the whole thing. It's just incredible. It's obviously 1/300 stroke 6 mil. When did you first get into the smaller scale? Because you said you started off with the command. Was it the command decision you said?
Yeah, so 1/72, then 15 millimeter, and then I got into 28 millimeter for a long time. So bolt action and GW stuff, of course, if you can even call that a scale. And then the Saga stuff is 28 millimeter too, most of it. So, but I just kind of started getting tired of it. And I started getting tired of it because my job makes me move every 6 to 12 years. So packing all that stuff up, and I have to pack it up every single year for Gen Con and all these conventions that I go to. And I was just like, well, this sucks to pack up all this 28 millimeter. And I'm the kind of person that I like it to be nice terrain, and nice terrain takes room. It takes space. And so we Dad and I started playing the 6 millimeter Civil War stuff, and then I started doing GHQ for the World War II stuff, and both of us was just like, I really like the look of this. I really like how it makes you feel like there's an army here, like there's guys moving in. We just like the feel of that, and I think we just got really tired with bolt action 28 millimeter that a guy couldn't shoot down the house, because the scale. Like, I mean, it's fine. Like, I get it. I mean, if I went back to play 28 millimeter World War II, it'd probably be more like Command Decisions or something, or Chain of Command. But yeah, we really liked the simplicity too. Dad's not rules heavy. I'm not terribly rules heavy. And again, I particularly when you run games at Gen Con, you're running games for people who have sometimes never played a war game in their life. And so, the simpler it can be, the better. But to give them the sense of like, yeah, I'm playing. Yes, I'm invading Normandy. Is I like that overall feel that you get, as opposed to, oh, well, this guy's got the MG42 and he can fire faster. Like, I just like the way.
I think what's really interesting, and I've talked about this to the Little Wars guys as well, is that you've put countless hours into producing this really museum quality diorama that you're going to then play multiple games over, but not just with you and your dad, but with complete strangers. and that you pack it up into your car or your van or whatever and take it to various shows, and other people get to then play on that table, whereas somebody building that quality setup in the UK, that would definitely be what we call a demonstration game, almost a do not touch. So you can have a look at it, but God forbid if you put your finger on it, you'll get shouted at by one of the players. And participation games tend to be, well, I'll add the caveat, unless it's put on by the Two Fat Lardies, because their participation games are beautiful. But for the vast majority of participation games, where you invite members of the public to come and play your game, it would be of a much lower quality. And there's a big difference between the UK convention scene and the States side convention scene, I appreciate, but was there any nervousness about particularly people who've never played war games before coming along and maybe leaning on the table or putting a Coke can on the water? Or how did you feel about that?
I guess I never really. I mean, I think about it as in, okay, people are going to abuse this, so how can I make this so it doesn't fall apart? That's what I start with. So I start with the assumption that people have no clue how much time and effort it goes into making something like this. And I do that. Now, I will say this. That's what I expect at Gen Con. What was nice when I went to Fall-In, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, which is just a purely historical wargaming convention on the East Coast. It was so nice because it's like, I didn't have to explain stuff to people.
Okay, yeah.
Like they just got it. Like everybody knew what they were supposed to do. Like there was definitely some kids there who, were very new to wargaming. But like they knew it's just like, well, no, this guy's painted these things. This guy's like put time and effort into it. And so like this guy's the GM. Like I'm going to do that. At Gen Con, I do find myself, I don't know, definitely by
your knuckles.
No. I by day 4, in fact, our club now has a policy that we don't run games on Sunday because all of us are so worn out, and everyone at the convention is so worn out that we have no patience left at all. I'm a very blunt person, which might strike people as odd if they find out what I do for a living, but there's been some times at Gen Con. I remember telling a guy once he had played in like multiple games before over the years, and like each time it was just miserable. And he was just like, well, I'm just not going to have fun if I stay here and play this game. And I said, I agree. We're not going to have fun if you stay here and play this game. So, okay. You just do that. The only other times that I kind of say something to someone is like, there was once a guy who picked up my miniatures and started rolling them around in his hand like they were dice.
Oh,
and
my
I was like, don't do that. It's like, those are hand painted. I'd prefer not to do that. So, they're just, but it was just an absent-minded thing that he was doing. So, I can kind of excuse that. So, so there is kind of, you do have to not be afraid to tell people that this stuff is more precious than they're treating it if they're treating it that way. But I find at the historical conventions, I don't have to do that. Like everybody knows. So I did laugh when I was at the historical convention because I was setting it up and there was an old guy in there who was setting up his felt tablecloth with his felt cut out, things for his game. And that's fine. Like, you can play that. But his wife was helping him. And she came over and she's like, oh, honey, look at this. It's so beautiful. And like his comment was like, yeah, but you can only use that for one thing and blah, blah. It's like, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. The other big project, and there's lots of goodness on this channel, Project Wargaming, and there'll be a link in the show notes to it. But the other big project on there, again, World War II, is the Berlin build, which we saw on the Little Wars TV episode that you provided the board to. Did that follow a similar process to your D-Day game?
Yeah, so interestingly, both of them coincided with the anniversaries. So I did the D-Day board game because I knew that I would be playing that game at Gen Con during the 75th anniversary year. And so when I was out in Fallen, I started thinking about, oh, well, what's the anniversary? When's Little Wars convention, which is in Chicago? And then I was like, well, what's the anniversary? If there are any battles that were over that time period that I'd be at Little Wars. And it was the Battle of Berlin. And I was like, oh, that'd be cool, pretty cool to do. So I decided I was going to build that board. But that board is built with 3D printing, which is kind of the big leap, I guess, on that board. It was really my entry into 3D printing and a lot of learning on 3D printing in that whole process. So very, very similar. I have a whole series of videos on how I thought about the game, how I wanted to play it out. Again, 8-player game. Storage was a big thing. Kind of Mel the Terrain Tutor talks about this, right? Is like, how are you going to store the game? And that is obviously a huge thing with these big boards, is like, how do you store them? Because you don't want to build it and just pitch it. You want to be able to play on it some. So how are you going to store it? So that was a big part of the build on storage. Now, my advantage is my dad is a carpenter. He loves woodworking. So he does the storage end of it, as far as like, I give him the idea of how I want to store the boards, and then he builds the storage box for him.
Right.
And so that helps.
So you have bespoke containers then built.
Yeah, that's my favorite English word, bespoke.
Sorry.
No, I just remember asking my buddy once when we were driving through England, I was like, what is bespoke? So,
that may be the first time I've used it on the podcast, to be honest. Maybe the last as well.
It's a little hoity-toity from someone from Stoke, right? So,
exactly, yeah.
But yeah, so yes, designed to carry that. And so if he told me when he built these, is like, these are the last carrying cases I'm building for you. So every other board you make has to fit into these boards. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. So we made it to a scale that I think will work for me in the future, and we did that. Now, the D-Day game board, like, it's got wheels and handles and all kinds of stuff to actually roll the thing in, because it's heavy. So that was the other big thing with the Berlin board. I was just like, this D-Day board's too freaking heavy. Like, I need to make this thing lighter, because I'm not getting younger, and I'm certainly not getting skinnier. So how do I make this a little bit easier to carry? So the D-Day board, or the Berlin board, is way lighter, way lighter. But that's also the 3D printing helped with that. So again, I think same thing with the idea with the Berlin board and the D-Day board, is not to necessarily recreate an exact copy of it, but instead someone walks by and they know immediately what that is and what that's about. The D-Day board game is based roughly on Omaha Beach, and the D-Day board game, or the Berlin board, is obviously based on the Reichstag and the Victory Column and the Zoo Flak Tower. Like, these are
such iconic buildings, aren't they?
Yeah.
That you immediately know where you are.
Yes.
When you see them.
Yeah. And if you don't, you still look at it and you're like, oh, that's really cool looking. What's happening? So yeah, the process was very similar, much more thought out, I would say, than the the D-Day game, because the D-Day game is, it's so nebulous, right? It's like, well, yeah, you had all these strong points, and all these strong points were kind of built differently, and there's some good data out there about what they would have looked like or what one would have looked like, but I'm not going to recreate every single bunker. I'm going to recreate a bunker that looks like a bunker, the style of bunker. Where with Berlin, it's like, no, the Reichstag is the Reichstag, and it needs to be that. So probably a little bit more detailed, actually, I would say, than the D-Day.
And not only the Reichstag, but a destroyed Reichstag.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
For anybody who's looked at the era or seen any of the footage, it is iconic, isn't it? In the skeleton that was left at that period in the war.
Yeah. I remember, I think I did a video where I had a color picture that I'd printed out of the destroyed Reichstag, and I put it beside the Reichstag that I built and modeled or painted, and I was like, that's pretty good. Like, pretty close.
I'm looking at it now. There's a thumbnail of that video, and you've got the picture of the Reichstag in the background, and your model of it in the foreground, and it's just wonderful. It's inspiring, actually. I've been to Berlin and been to the Reichstag, and the area where you set the battle, and it really is great. And I'm so thankful that I got to see this game played out by the Little Wars TV guys, because it really showed it off. It's the next best thing to actually being in the room.
Yeah.
Hopefully I may get to see this one at some point in the future, but
yeah.
That's the next best thing. It really is a stunning effort, and I really take my hat off to you.
Well, we had planned on getting together at Little Wars, the convention up at Chicago, but then of course lockdown happened and everything was shut down. And but I had this board, and then of course, when we got out of our first lockdown, Greg and I contacted each other, and I was like, hey, I'm willing to come out and bring this and play this at your guys' club if you're interested. And so luckily it just worked out, and it was a great time. Like I said, we made it into a whole trip. Got to play some games with Steve and Greg, and interact with them. And it's kind of funny, when you see stuff on TV and then you go to it, right? It's just like, it's so different in person. And so, like, I remember walking into their club, and I was just like, wow, this is really tiny. This is very small. Like, I didn't picture this for some reason. And then, just how they film and everything too is just like, okay, that's interesting how they do that. So, and then of course the personalities and interactions and all that. So
it's a real peek behind the curtain, isn't it?
Yeah. So
and they always say, never meet your heroes. Never meet your heroes.
Well, it's funny because my dad is in that video, but he's the one sitting at the table over there doing nothing. He didn't want to play with him. Like, he didn't want to play. He didn't want to be in the videos. He didn't want to play. So he's sitting over there playing actually some Civil War games on his computer the whole time.
Oh, really? There you go.
So, yeah, it was fun. It was really enjoyable to get out there and play it. And I get a kick. I get just as big a kick running games for people as I do playing them. Probably maybe more so. I enjoy running games every bit as much as I enjoy playing games. So like on Monday, a group of friends are going to get together, and we're going to do an Old West game that I've been working on. And, 5 of them are going to play, and I'm going to run it. And I'm going to have a lot of fun. It's just, if you've played a lot of games, it's not a lot of fun playing games with people who haven't played games. But I just, I don't know. I get as much enjoyment out of running them as I do. And so whenever I build something, I always build it with that in mind, that I'm not really going to be playing on this game. I'm gonna be having other people play on this board. So
I entirely get that, and I'm very much of the same opinion, to be honest. That the actual playing of the game is almost secondary for me. I'm building the Antietam game at the moment for Ultra Freedom, and I've got people interested at my club for when we can meet again to say which commands do you want to take and which side do you want to be on. And I'm pretty sure I'm just going to be running the game for them as a sort of umpire and just watching the thing unfold. So I totally get that. It's there's something to be said for letting others enjoy your creation, and there must be a lot of satisfaction for you in that.
yeah, well, I think it's the teacher side in me coming out, right? And when we get back, like the school that I'm associated with, like we had a game. I had a game club that I was running for kids afterwards, and that was fun. And I was honestly the most disappointing thing about the first lockdown, was I was going to run the Berlin game for a high school that I help out at. And so I was just really disappointed that we didn't get. No, it was the D-Day game. I was going to run the D-Day game for their AP history class, and quite honestly, that was that was probably the most disappointing thing that I had to miss because of the whole lockdown situation. So
Well,
maybe again, we'll see.
Yeah, let's hope the green shoots of recovery are on the way worldwide, and that with the vaccines that are being developed. So hopefully, brighter times ahead. Tell me about the YouTube channel then, Aaron, because I think you've got over 177 videos.
Do I? I haven't even checked.
Yeah. I like to do my research, and over 1,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. So, what was the inspiration for that?
Well, like I said, I had a blog to begin with, and I was terrible at writing, and videoing was way more effective for me as far as just kind of vlogging, I guess. So easier. If you read the description of my webpage or YouTube page, it is short, unadorned videos, and I think that that's pretty much what I have. I've ventured into some battle reports and things like that, but as you know, doing the podcast, like editing this stuff just takes forever, and like
Sure does.
I would really prefer to make the stuff or play the stuff than to make videos about the stuff. So I'm hats off to Greg and Steve and those guys who, really do put the time and effort into making great videos, because they're awesome. But that's just not my cup of tea. I'll do it every once in a while, but it isn't something I'm going to focus on. So, going forward, like I'm going to continue to do the how-tos, some battle reports, but also what I've found that I enjoy doing is like the experiments, particularly around the 3D printing stuff. Like if I think there's a whole category of videos on 3D printing, and it's basically, if you watch the very first video to the latest video, like you can catalog my progress to still be not good at something.
You're a humble man, Aaron. You really do yourself a disservice, because I've seen your 3D printing. You sent a lovely sample box through to me, and there's some lovely bits in there. The samurai are really gorgeous.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so it's just been fun, and it's just been kind of an inspiration, and it's nice to kind of get some of that feedback from the community, right? Of like other guys who are like, oh, yeah, I've thought about 3D printing. This is kind of what I thought about. I had thought about 3D printing for a long time. And then Steve did his videos on Little Wars TV about 3D printing, and he typically does the FDM printing, which is the bigger. It's better for bigger stuff. And I knew that I was just going to be doing 6 millimeter stuff, so like that's why I went with the resin, um, and so that you get a finer detail and all that with it. So um, yeah, so it's just been really enjoyable. Like I've like anything, you get a couple comments where you're just like, go to bed, like why are you doing this? Um, but it's been enjoyable. Been enjoyable to help other guys do that. In a similar way to what Little Wars is trying to do with trying to introduce people into wargaming and get that going. Like all of us come from different angles into the hobby, right? Um, I just love making stuff. I like making models. I like making terrain. Um, I've always kind of had this little dream of having my own little miniature company, I guess. And I had actually, you can go back and look, but I was actually starting to do some 3D sculpting with, well, not 3D sculpting. I was trying to do some sculpting with green stuff and things, but I just kind of started thinking about it, and I was just like, 3D printing is, I think, kind of where it's going to go, and it's much makes it much easier for me to be able to put my stuff out there, because Indiana is actually a great state to live in if you want to produce metal miniatures. Like there's a lot of casters and there's a lot of people who do it in Indiana, and they're good. Um, but I was like, I don't have the time or the ability to have the overhead to open up a shop, and then having relationships with other people to be able to put your stuff out there. And so in some ways, I think 3D printing and being able to, now have your own like Shopify website to sell your stuff on or put your stuff out there for free is going to be just another avenue for people to kind of get into the game, to get into gaming and make it more accessible to people. Um, because I love the feel of metal miniatures, but I can tell you what, like I love being able to magnetize my bases and stack them full in in these carrying cases, and they take up no room at all, and they're not heavy. So yeah,
The channel is a real variety of content, isn't it? From 21 videos on 6mm sculpting to the Berlin build or World War II naval. I know there's quite a lot of 6mm American Civil War on there. I think you played a campaign out with your dad, haven't you, on there? Your own interest in history and historical wargaming, does it run the whole gamut of history, or is there a period that you're not particularly interested in that you would never touch?
Napoleonics.
Okay, too much lace.
I don't know what the deal is with Napoleonics. I've just never been interested. I love obviously Napoleonic naval, but I've just never really been interested in Napoleonics. I love the medieval period. I love, I just love that period. It's just so fascinating to me, like feudalism and how it all works, and like, uh, it's just that's just fascinating to me. Um, and I find that I gravitate towards periods of decline and change. So I love the fall of Rome and Britain. That sort of time period. Um, I love the Revolutionary War. I love the Civil War, American Civil War. Um, those periods and just kind of how society functions and or doesn't function. I love World War II for all kinds of different reasons, but it's definitely one of my bigger periods. I'm not quite as interested, I think, in the modern stuff. Um, I mean, I think it's neat, and I can understand how people get into it. but it just isn't super big for me. But those are the periods that I really like. I tell you what, like, has really sparked my interest lately is, I'm gonna butcher his name, Mark Backenhouse or Backhouse.
Backhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's doing the 2 millimeter stuff.
He is,
Strength
yeah,
and
the
honor.
sculpting
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
I have completely been fascinated by that, and I love the look of it because again, it's kind of like the 6 millimeter stuff, right? Where it's like the figures are there, but it's really the terrain and the armies that are standing out. Um, and so I think I'm going to probably go down a rabbit hole of designing 2 millimeter figures here, to kind of see what they look like. I'm
look
really
forward to that.
fascinated by that. The whole
Yeah,
time.
the work Mark's done on that is fabulous. Particularly with the horde type infantry, where you've got this absolute mass of it's milliput, isn't it? That's been scored and then painted to have the effect of a mass of 10,000 men or whatever it is represented on the base. It's just something that I've never seen before, and to be executed as well as Mark executes it on those bases is just wonderful. And that is another disappointment for me, that the show scene is dead at the moment with the pandemic, because undoubtedly I would have seen that at a show at somewhere up and down the country. But yeah, it's gripped me as well. It's really opened my eyes to possibilities and future plans and projects, but there's only so much time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Yes.
problem.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull you up on one thing, actually, Aaron, because you've got one video here, one solitary, lonely video on the American War of Independence.
Yes.
And I'm glad you called it the War of Independence and not the Revolution, actually. That's interesting.
Well, I have to pull in as many viewers as possible, and so since 50% of my viewership comes from the UK,
you got to play to the audience.
Yeah, but if you watch the video, it says that we're going to play that game at the Joyous 6 on the July 4th, and of course it's going to be based on a game where the British lost.
Well, it's some insignificant little battle somewhere. I'm sure it's
in
really
Indiana. It's not insignificant.
No, not at all. It's an interesting video, that is, actually, because joking aside, it was and my own interest in history tends to be American history, from the early days through to Vietnam. But that particular battle was one I'd never heard of, and I consider myself relatively well read on the Revolution. But so that really taught me something I didn't know. There's a real historical interest for me in it, and it made me to go and look into that battle further. So, have you got any further along with that one or not?
I kind of put it on hold. I had sculpted up or modeled up Native Americans in 6mm for that, and so I'd done some test prints and things like that. But then me and my buddy realized that we weren't going to be able to go over to the Joy of 6 this year. I've been vaccinated because of the job I have, but he's not going to be vaccinated by then, and rightly so, the UK and world travel is going to be messed up because of everything. And so it's disappointing, but we did decide that instead of going to the Joy of 6, that here at the end of April and May, we're going to take a trip down the Mississippi, and we're going to go to Fort Donelson and Henry and Vicksburg and Shiloh and Corinth and Stones River, which I have both sides of my family fought in. So yeah, really? So it's going to be epic.
Into my chair here, Aaron.
Well, you can live it through my Twitter account. I'll be sure to post the Twitter stuff, but maybe even some videos. But so it's disappointing we can't get to England this year, but I think it's the right decision, and it allows us to travel to some stuff that we really have been wanting to travel to for quite some time and just have never done it. So,
And there's always next year.
always next year. Yes.
Always next year. So on the 3D printing front then, have you got any tips or words of advice for anybody out there who might want to get into 3D printing?
Yes. First is you're not going to save any money by getting into 3D printing. I talked about this on the other podcast, Across the Pond. He asked me, he's just like, well, do you think you save your money? And I just started laughing because it's like, we don't ever save money as gamers. Like that's just not what we do. I was scandalized because since I've kind of started this little side business, I actually I went through and figured out how much I had spent on resin this year. It was not good. It was a lot more money than I thought. Now that being said, like again, I don't have a family, I don't have kids, so I have a little bit more disposable income. But so yeah, you can think that you can get into it by saving some money, but I just don't think that that's true. Because of how we are as people. I will say that the biggest thing I think you need to figure out for 3D printing is what are you going to 3D print? Are you going to 3D print big stuff? Buildings, like 28 millimeter buildings? Or are you going to print figures or smaller scale things? If you're going to print, some huge bunker at 28 millimeter, well, you need to get an FDM printer, which is a plastic sort of nozzle looking thing that prints that scale, and is able to print those bigger things. If you're going to print figures or something that needs a lot of detail to it, then the only way to go is really resin. Resin, both 3D printing types have their issues and to some extent some of their safety issues as well. Resin printing is a little bit more you need to be more conscious about your safety because you're printing with basically a liquid resin that is hardened by UV light, and so that liquid resin you don't want that on your skin, because if you go out with that on your skin in the sunlight, it's going to UV cure in your skin, which isn't going to feel really well and is not going to be good for you. So there's some. I've heard a lot of people talk about fumes coming from it, but I've never really experienced that overwhelming smell. The smell that I get that is heavier is I use 99% alcohol to clean my models. That's a much stronger smell than the resin itself. I was just thinking the other day that I ought to do a new video on things that I've learned and how I have my table set up now for 3D printing, because it's going to be completely different than what I did a year ago. But the biggest thing that I've learned in the last 2 months is that I actually spent the money and purchased one of the new cleaners that they have for resin printing, that like Elegoo or Anaphobic or whatever the companies are. They have like this little tub that you put your liquid in, and then it has this little magnetized fan at the bottom that stirs up the alcohol or whatever you're cleaning solution in, and it cleans everything so much more efficiently and so much better than putting it in a pickle jar and shaking it. And so that has actually saved me money. So one thing that has saved me money, because I don't need nearly as many gloves, and I don't need nearly as many paper towels. And actually my models look way better because they're way cleaner than that. But I like 3D printing for the same reason that I like fly fishing. And I like fly fishing because I get to tie my own flies and catch fish with it. And I like 3D printing because I get to model my own models, and I get to print my own models, and I get to paint my own models. And so I have control over every step. Maybe it's a control issue. Maybe I need to take that up with my spiritual director. Um, but I like being able to do it from beginning to end. I get some kind of satisfaction out of that. And there are beautiful models out there. There are beautiful figures. And but I still kind of like doing it on my own. And I can do stuff that nobody else is doing. Like I'm doing niche stuff, right? So like as I kind of tweeted out today earlier, it's just like it's a niche of a niche of a niche. And so like I can do the Battle of Sackville that nobody knows about. And I can do it in basically 1-to-1 scale because I can 3D model the models. I can 3D model the fort of Sackville. And I can do that. Where I could go to Bacchus and buy the 6mm figures and kind of do it, but Bacchus doesn't have Winter British. They don't have, backwoodsmen for the Americans. So, but I can do that. So, yeah.
Are you pretty much self-sufficient then, would you say, in your hobby at the moment?
I am. Besides buying GHQ World War II models, which I don't think I'll ever try to model, because why would I? I live in America and I can buy GHQ models for. I think I probably bought my last metal models. I think all of my other projects are going to be me modeling them themselves and printing them off. Now, I might buy some other models from some other people, but yeah, I don't foresee myself purchasing much other stuff. 28 millimeters stuff I'm never going to make myself. I'll buy that, but I'm not buying a lot of that. I basically the only thing I'm gaming in 28mm is Saga on occasion and Wild West stuff.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that I don't think, well, certainly not 10 years ago, probably not 5 years ago. I'm not quite sure how long the technology's been around to provide the quality that wargamers desire, but to think that you can be self-sufficient within the hobby, it's a real step forward. Well, it is a step forward. Hesitated there, but I think it is a step forward. But to show where the hobby is going, I think it's really interesting for somebody who's been in the hobby as long as I have, which is 30 plus years, to think that you now can turn out the armies, the scenery, the baseboards, just about the whole kit and caboodle, yourself, to your own specifications is just incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that, well, I sent you some models of it. I sent you the snake rail fence, and that model to me is kind of the game changer in my mind, because it was funny, the process of coming to model that snake rail fence, because I started off having someone model me in a 3D file a snake rail fence. I said, this is kind of what I want it to look like. And I got it back and it was not good. it wasn't correct. And so it was hard to be ticked because the guy did it for free, and I didn't want to take advantage of him or anything. So I was like, well, this seems simple enough. Are there programs out there? So then I found Tinkercad. So then I modeled it up in Tinkercad, then I printed it off. And I was like, wow, that looks really good. That's way faster than me clipping off individual pieces of wood or plastic and then building up a snake rail fence. I can do this way faster by printing, and it looks better. And then I remember sitting there looking at it, and I was just like, well, wait a minute. I know what snake rail fence looks like. It's not square. it it's split rails, and they're triangles. And I was like, well, I wonder if I could model that up. So sure enough, I went in and I modeled up some triangular shaped snake rail fence. I printed it all off, and I remember just sitting there looking at those prints after they were done. And I was like, holy crap, this worked, and it looks better than anything I've ever seen.
Yes. Well, I was blown away by it because it's, as a 6mm American Civil War gamer, I'm of the opinion that you can never have too much snake rail fencing. It's an eternal conundrum as to how to model it traditionally. And I know that Per Broden, a good friend and guest on the show, has done it previously with spaghetti. But the thought of sitting there and cutting up hundreds and hundreds of tiny bits of spaghetti and then having to lay them one on top of the other just would be too much like soul destroying for me. So when your fencing arrived, I thought, this is incredible. It really is. And one of the first things I picked up on was the fact that it looks like a split rail fence. And there's absolutely no way you could model that in 6mm by hand.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is just like, holy crap, there's things you can do with a 3D printer that you can't do by hand. And that's just the reality. It's like, I look back at the D-Day board and I hand modeled every single bunker. Now I'd be like, I can go in and 3D model that and 3D print those way faster. And it would be cheaper because I spent the money on the molds. I spent the money on the resin to cast them. And now it would be cheaper to 3D print those for sure.
And a hell of a lot quicker.
Yes, a hell of a lot quicker. So, yeah, I mean, the only thing that's holding 3D printing back at the moment, and those are quickly fading away, is really the for resin, the size of your prints. And then it was detail. And so there was a couple companies that came out this last year with a bigger one and then a one that was similar in size but printed faster and more detailed. And so I went with buying a new printer that was faster and more detailed. And I'm very happy with that that decision. So
where do you see this progressing, Aaron, in another 5 or 10 years? Where do you think this technology will leave the wargamer in 5 or 10 years?
Well, I would say if you had asked me 6 months ago, even just 6 months ago, because I was 3D printing like my Crusader army. I was 3D printing my Crusader army, and I knew that printing something that small in resin is going to be hard not to break. And so I thought, well, it's going to be a while before resin gets to the point where it's as hard as metal. But then I did some looking around, and I found that there was a resin out there that actually made your models tougher by making them more flexible. And so I could actually have the long spears and they not break. It's more like soft plastic than it is like a hard plastic. And so once that happened, it was just like, then there's really no boundary for me not making 6mm figures and printing those off. So it's just like every single time that there's some kind of boundary that comes up for me, like and I think, it's going to be like 5 years before we figure this out. It's like within 6 months, it's figured out. Um, it's just the speed at which it's changing is kind of crazy. Um, so I don't know if this kid even listens to the podcast, but the, Henry Turner is his name. I follow him on Facebook, but he has printed. He started off making models for 1/600 scale ships. So like they did like the Napoleonic naval stuff. Um, so like the Warlord didn't have any, like, I think they're called Razzies or these ships that have been kind of cut off and made kind of like 50 gunners instead of 74 gunners. Um, well, he had some models, so I purchased them and printed them. Well, he's recently modeled the entire Civil War in that. He's got a Kickstarter going on, and so that's just it's just going to happen more and more. Like, there's just going to be these guys. It's kind of in some ways liberalized the hobby and creativity in a good way. I think that all of these like random things that people want to do, they can now do, because there's going to be some other dude out there who's going to do it, and then he's going to post it someplace for you to buy, or maybe for free for you to download. And if you got a 3D printer, you can do it, but chances are in the future you're going to have a nephew or a son or a friend who's going to have a 3D printer, and they'll print it off for you. So I just kind of see that starting to be the avenue where a lot of people start designing and putting good stuff out there, if that makes sense.
Can you see a time when you'll be printing in colour, so you could print off an almost ready painted figure?
Well, you can print in color right now, but it's just going to be a single color. There are the FDM printers that are starting to have multiple nozzles on them that will actually do that. So if you wanted to print red brick, and then the roof slate, you can do that now if you have that printer. Resin printer, I don't know how that's ever going to happen, because your resin printing is just basically you have a vat of resin sitting in there, and your plunger goes down and prints that away. Like, so I just don't ever see that being able to get to there. I don't know how it would.
There'll be some kid in college right now
Yeah.
who 20 years from now will develop something, I'm sure. But it's fascinating to me. I've got a friend who's got the non-resin type printer, and it's been a real steep learning curve for him. But the stuff that he's churning out now, AFVs and buildings and bunkers, is fantastic, and that's really with a fairly modest priced printer. So it's something that I've never thought that I would get into myself, but the more I talk to you, Aaron, I'm thinking, well, maybe never say never, and it could lie in the future.
Well, I mean, think of it this way. You know, you might. So I have a website. I put up a lot of my models for free up there, because Thingiverse is janky and sometimes doesn't work right, and so I was just like, oh, I'll just put up my own website where people can download stuff for free, and then I have some stuff for sale. So you can go to my website right now. You can download for free all the different types of fencing that you need for the American Civil War. You can pretty easily put that in to your slicer program and print those. And you will get 5 of those longer strips of fencing. You know, you can probably get like 10 of those on a plate. It takes 2 hours to do. You know, you do that, you have a day where you're at home all day, and all you can do is just push play, you walk away, you go work on something else. You come back in 2 hours, it's finished. You take it off, you clean it, you start over. By the end of the day, you suddenly have, 50 to 60 of those strips. I mean, right there for an ACW wargamer, that saved most of your life.
And your eyesight.
yeah, and your sanity. Your family life is going to be better because you're not going to be yelling at people. So, for terrain itself, I think it's worth it.
I certainly think we're at the point now of no return. That this technology is just going to get better and better and better, and more available, more readily available for people. I mean, if I want it now, I can order one now, obviously, but costs will come down. The quality of the prints will improve, and I think if I was a traditional manufacturer of Wargames figures, in another 5 years or so, I'd probably be getting quite worried, I would have thought, over my business model.
Yeah, and to be honest, like when I was sculpting in milliputty or green stuff, that's the thought that I had. It was just like, well, it's hard for me to commit to learning this process that I know that I can learn, but it seems like this process is going away. And to some extent, as an artisan myself, like I hate to say that, right? Like there's some beauty of it, to that, like Peter's sculpts and even Adler's stuff. Like it's just like they're just great models. So you would hate for that to go away. And I don't think that metal miniatures will ever go away, but I do think it's going to eat into the market for sure. And I really do get concerned for more of the terrain manufacturers. Because I think terrain tends to be very easy to print off. It's not nearly as fickle as trying to print off 6mm figures for sure, or even 28mm figures for that matter. But I've recently sculpted and modeled some Italian buildings and put those up on my website, and I have a couple videos on that too. It's just like they're lighter, they're cheap, they're fast to make. I can make as many as I want, and the other thing is it allows you some flexibility as far as putting things together. So this was the first set that I put out that had like a church. So like you got the kind of classic, Italian church. Well, I made it so that the steeple was separate, and you can add it in there. You can scale it up and you can scale it down as well. So, I have whole like city blocks that I've just kind of put the buildings together in the slicer. And so when they print off, they're already in the city blocks. I don't have to like worry about these weird, joints covering those up and doing all that. So there's some real advantages to 3D printing when it comes to that sort of stuff that you're not going to be able to get by having metal miniatures, because of the process that's involved in there.
You could almost say that you could print off your own bespoke city.
Yes, a very bespoke city, if you'd like, which I did actually on one of my videos. I have a whole Italian hill town, which I don't know if I've ever highlighted, but you can kind of see it in the background of my Italian hill videos. So it's just sitting there waiting for me to finish up and do the video on. But really happy with how those buildings look and how they turn out.
It's a beautiful model. I've seen the pictures of it, Aaron. It really is a gorgeous model. Okay, where's your hobby at then at the moment? What's your current project? What's on the plate at the moment for you?
I am going to be. My plans are to return to the Crusades. So about a year ago, I finished up the Crusader army in 6mm, and now I want to go back in and model up the Saracen army, so that I can actually start playing the games. So I definitely want to kind of focus in on them over the next couple of months. Like I said, I think I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of 2mm stuff and
Yes.
and mess about with that a little bit. This summer, depending on how Gen Con falls and then how the 7 Years War Convention falls, I might actually return to the uh, American Revolutionary War and and finish up that project so that I can take that game up to the 7 Years War Convention and actually run that. So that would be a good driving force to finish that up. So that's kind of the bigger stuff for my hobbies. Playing, Dad and I'm sure, will be returning to the Civil War. We kind of put our campaign off for quite some time just because I didn't really like the rules that I'd written up for the campaign. So with Little Wars having their Pyrrhic War, or I don't know how you pronounce it, Pyrrhic War campaign coming out, I have their rules, and I might try to adjust the Civil War rules, campaign rules, kind of based on that. So we'll probably do that, particularly after we get back from our worldwide or Mississippi trip of all the Civil War sites. I'm sure we'll have the bug to fight it out there. So that's plenty. I think there'll be something else come up and
It
take me
certainly
away.
is. I think one of the joys of this hobby is that there's always something else to do, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
We're very rarely stuck for
Yeah.
something to do in this hobby, whether it's painting, whether it's building, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's reading up or planning the next project. So it really is one of the joys of wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned a couple of times your website, Aaron, which is separate to your YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a website where people can access your own 3D print files.
Yeah. So I have a number of things on there. Well, first I have a Facebook page that I periodically post stuff to. I'm not very good at posting stuff there, but I do have a website, projectwargaming.com. Pretty straightforward there. And it just has my models on there. So a lot of the stuff that I put on Thingiverse, which is a website for downloading and sharing STL files that you use for 3D printing. I'm not really posting anything on Thingiverse anymore because, like I said, I've had issues with files just disappearing or people not being able to get the files. So it didn't seem like a terribly stable platform for me. So I just decided to go ahead and open up my own site, and it's through Shopify, but a lot of the models on there are for free, particularly the terrain stuff. So folks can go on there and do that. There's a lot of the stuff that I posted on my YouTube page. I've then posted up on my web page for sale or for free. So it's I get consistent hits. I pretty much have at least one download a day for some kind of file, and it's kind of fun because I get to see from where they're doing it, and a lot of it's UK, a lot of it's America, but a lot of Germans, a lot of Polish folks, kind of all over. So
Yeah,
it's just
yes.
very interesting to see the spread of that. So
Any customers from the Democratic Republic of Congo? I asked this because I've had around about 45 downloads of the podcast from the DRC, and I'm wondering who in the DRC is listening to me. If you're out there, please get in touch.
I don't know if it's there. I have had some from Asia, which is kind of surprising to me. But
it's the beauty of the internet, isn't it? You know, we reach all four corners of the globe. Well, globe doesn't have corners, but you know the point. It's fascinating the reach and the very fact that we're talking now is just wonderful, isn't it? That we can connect.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Remember when the internet was coming out and like I was playing some kind of online game for the first time, and I got on there and was playing a game, and the guy asked me, well, where are you from? Where are you at? And I was like, well, I'm from Indiana. He's like, well, where's that? I'm like, well, it's in America in the center part. It's the state below the state that looks like a glove. And he was like, you're lying. I'm like, no, I'm from America. I was like, well, where are you from? It's from Australia. I'm like,
Wow.
Okay, well that's pretty amazing, but here we are.
Yeah.
So
well, I certainly remember the pre-internet days, and I still wonder at the magic that it brings every day.
Yeah.
Aaron, it's been fantastic to talk to you. It really has. I know it's been a long time coming, but it was worth the wait because I am fascinated by the world of 3D printing, and I can't wait to see where it takes us. In years.
I think the only other advice I give to people is just like if you like DIY stuff, if you like to do it yourself, you'll like 3D printing. It's problem solving. It's not perfect, but if you like doing stuff yourself, you'll enjoy it. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think it'll help the hobby in the long run.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's in my future at some point. I don't think I'll be avoiding it forever. And just this conversation today has made me think it's probably closer in my future than I thought. But
well, when you get one, you can call me up and complain about everything that's going wrong and blame it all on me.
You told me this was the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then your wife will call me up and she's like, he's spending way too much money. This was supposed to be cost saving.
I tell you what, if it does save money, then she will be sending you a Christmas card every year. Don't worry about that. Aaron, thanks so much for giving up your time. It's been fantastic to talk to you. And as I say, it's been a long time coming, but hopefully it was worth it. Now, as any long-time listener of the show will know, I request two things of any guest on the show. The first is relatively easy and painless, and that I ask that you'll return and have another chat with us at some point in the future.
Absolutely. I hope that the next time we chat is when you come over to Gen Con and we can do it over a glass of scotch at my house and record it that way.
You're talking my language now. That would be great, wouldn't it? Doing a live recording. Fantastic.
That's right.
Yeah. And the second is I'm going to ask for you to deposit a book into the God's Own Scale virtual library. The shelves are getting quite packed now, and I really should do an inventory of what's on there. But I'm hoping that you have a book or two to put on the shelves, Aaron.
I do. So I have. I think this is a great book just for kind of the American perspective and particularly for its time period. But Brave Men by Ernie Pyle. I don't know if you're familiar with Ernie Pyle, but he was probably the most famous journalist from America during World War II. And he's a Hoosier, just like me. And I just finished reading his book Brave Men not too long ago. It centers around the Italian campaign, and I just found it really fascinating to read because it just kind of took you to a different time. It wasn't about generals. It wasn't like who's, I think Atkinson is one of the big historians that I've been reading too. It wasn't like, talking about all these strategy things. It was just talking about like, hey, here's Bob, and Bob's from Indiana too, and Bob has his family back home, and blah blah blah, and uh, it kind of really personalized everything, and it helped kind of remind me that World War II, and it was fought by guys. It was fought by boys really who had family back home, and for whatever reason they felt called to go over and do this thing, or were drafted and went over and did it. And so um, I just I thought it was a great book, um, for that, and in a very American book, because Grant's memoirs are already taken by Greg. But
Yeah, he beat you to it.
but I think Brave Men is a great little book, to read. Another book that I do love, um, because it's anti-British, is Six Frigates, which is just a story of the first six frigates in the American Navy. Um, but those are my two American books to put on your shelf.
The I'm not aware of any pile, I have to say, but those kind of books I think resonate far more with me the older I get. Um, I consider myself fairly well read in military history. World War II isn't a strong point of mine, but the older I get, I want to know these personal stories and what motivated people to pick up a gun and go to a foreign country and fight, and more. I want to know more. I want to know about those people more so than the tactics and the overall strategy and the generals and the names of the battles, because I do find myself reflecting on, if I was born in a different time and a different age, then this could easily have been me doing the same sort of thing. And particularly as wargamers, we can sometimes. I don't like the thought that we glorify war. I don't think that's the case at all. But sometimes it's very easy to lose sight of the fact of what we're representing on the tabletop. Because I'm pretty damn sure that none of us would actually like to be the figures that we're playing with on that tabletop in the situations that we put them into.
I think that really helped me as a younger kid when I was wargaming, because I started to realize this is like, whoa, when I take figures off the table, that's guys dying, you know. And so I do think that wargaming helped me have an appreciation for how terrible it actually is. And then in historical wargaming hopefully leads to historical research, at which point you start, it can get depressing. Like when I was doing the Berlin board, it was so stinking depressing to read some of those Eastern Front books. I was just like, I knew it was bad, but oh my lord, this is just awful, awful. Um, I mean, I was literally depressed when I got done with some of those books. I was just like, I just can't imagine this. So, but Ernie Pyle, it, Brave Men, it's a collection of his writings that would appear back home, syndicated columns that would appear back home in America. And so he really takes the time to like talk about this person and their life and their loved ones back home, which of course is kind of, propagandist, I guess, in the sense of like, look, all these guys are fighting for you and you need to do your work at home and blah blah blah. But it also very much humanizes that. And so I I've always kind of respected Ernie Pyle for his ability to really concentrate on the individual soldier, the personal soldier, as opposed to some of the other war correspondents that, quite frankly, like to hang out at headquarters and write about Ike, um, or drink more red wine. than they probably should have in
Yes.
France. So,
Yeah.
not that Ernie Pyle didn't drink too much red wine, but yeah. So it's just fun, and he does have some really kind of funny kind of stories and stuff in there too. So,
I think when you can find the humour in such adversity, then it really helps to understand and appreciate the circumstances that some of these people found themselves in. And certainly my reading over the last couple of years has evolved from away from that sort of grand tactical strategy type thing and down to that personal level. And I've not done this before, but I'm going to put a book on the God's Own Scale shelf, library shelf. And it's a book called The Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin, which is about life and death during the American Civil War, particularly death, actually, about how death was viewed as much of a spiritual thing as a physical ending of life, and how the families reacted to the death of their sons as they fought against brother, as it was. I highly recommend it as a book to sort of get into that psyche of what life was like during that conflict.
Well, in some ways, our whole funeral industry in America began in the Civil War. And, so it's just amazing how many practices started at that time that are still around in America, So it is interesting. What was can you give me the name again?
Yeah,
not that I can't listen to your podcasts again.
The Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin. Drew Gilpin Faust. Actually, I just stood up to check the shelf there. Drew Gilpin Faust. It's a beautiful book. It really is.
Definitely look it up.
And a tad depressing as well because of the subject matter, because it's about death throughout. But highly recommended. Aaron, again, thanks so much. Thanks for your patience with me. I know we've had a couple of dates that I've stood you up on.
We've had some things going on,
Well, we all do. We all do.
Yes.
But it's been great fun. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will return at some point in the future.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for doing this. I know lots of us really appreciate your podcast. You're one of the ones that I support, and I do that because I enjoy it. So,
and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Brother Bertie went away to do his bit the other day, with a smile on his lips and his lieutenant pips upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said, "Remember me to all the birds." Then he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic words: "Goodbye, goodbye, wipe a tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll feel sicker than death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, all things, cheerio, chin chin, naboo, toodaloo, goodbye." At the concert down at Kew, some convalescents dressed in blue had to hear Lady Lee, who had turned 83, sing all the old songs she knew. Then she made a speech and said, "I look upon you boys with pride, and for what you've done I'm going to kiss each one." Then they all grabbed their sticks and cried, "Goodbye, goodbye, wipe the tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll feel sicker than death to go. Don't cry,
don't sigh. There's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old sing, cheerio, chin chin, na boo, toodaloo, goodbye. Little Private Fenwick saw he was the prisoner of war. Till the Hun with the gun called him pig dog for fun, and Paddy punched him on the door. Right across the barbed wire fence the German dropped then, dear, oh dear. All the while gave way and Paddy yelled, hooray, as he ran for the Dutch frontier. Goodbye, goodbye, wipe a dear baby dear from your eye. Though it's hard to pass, I know, I'll be single and it's to go. Don't cry, don't cry, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, all things cheerio, chin chin, na poo.